I'd like to recognise the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present.
The Great East Japan earthquake occurred.
Well, my home and my workplace are in Christchurch, New Zealand, and over the last year we've experienced a swarm of earthquakes that have had a fairly drastic impact on the city and its residents. While the magnitude of these earthquakes have been considerably less than that experienced in Japan, they were still significant events, each resulting in a massive release of energy that have caused the hills on our southeastern border of the city to rise 40 centimetres. And this, combined with the shallow depth of the earthquakes at less than 10 kilometres, their proximity to the city, and having three within a relatively short period of time, are why they have been so damaging to our buildings and our infrastructure.
We haven't been without some major events in Australia in the last year or so, some major emergency events.
The destruction of the government offices meant that documents were lost. There was absolute shortage of staff, so things were very difficult, yet local government staff tried to confirm the safety and the evacuation of residents and tried to recover the essential services. Recovery is progressing gradually, but the work of the local governments continue to increase, and the staff have been working endlessly with little sleep or rest since the earthquake.
The central business district, where most government departments are located, has been cordoned off for 8 months, and it's steadily been reduced to piles of rubble. About half the buildings are to be demolished, and that's unlikely to be completed before April. Because their workplaces have been declared unsafe, destroyed, or are simply behind the cordon and can't be accessed, our members' work has been relocated. In most cases, to multiple sites all over the city, and many are working in cramped makeshift offices. The Department of Justice and all our court buildings are behind the cordon. Paper files and court records remain strewn throughout their basement, which nobody has been able to access for 8 months. The District Court is now a porter cabin on a marae 7 kilometres from the city centre. The building measures just 2 metres by 9 metres and during busy periods accommodates up to 15 people. Members of the public are seen in this outside area that you can see in the slide. However, you will note that it does have some seating. There's a gas heater there for when it's cold, and the plywood floor helps keep the mud off your shoes in the wet weather. This is the staff lunchroom. It's a camper van parked next to the portaloos, and the staff joke about taking their lunchroom for a bit of a spin to get fish and chips. The PSA too has had its share of tough times. Our offices were significantly damaged in February, but fortunately no one was hurt. The building was in the cordoned area, and we have never been able to retrieve our equipment, files, or the staff's personal belongings. This is the building as it was being demolished with all its contents. We of course had good business continuity plans in place, and staff were able to work from their homes until new premises were found.
In this state, that's the state of New South Wales, whenever there's a major emergency, we work under what's called the State Emergency Rescue Management Act. Police need to work very closely and cooperatively with all of those other public safety agencies. So obviously, police, fire, State Emergency Services Group, most of whom are volunteers, our ambulance services and our paramedics, Surf Life Saving Australia, for example, with Australia's Defence Forces. The other area that's very vital for us to be coordinated around are the areas of local government, particularly including utilities such as water and power, to areas of health that of course includes nurses and doctors, and I'll talk in a minute how much, of course, in situations of emergency, the health system and our hospitals are obviously so vital.
Local enterprises were forced into bankruptcy or failed after the quake. The company failures affected the workers of those companies, but also impacted the younger generation who had already been offered to work by those companies and who were fresh out of university or high school. I think it is important to hasten the recovery by bringing unemployed youth wishing to work in the affected areas to the public sector so that recovery and reconstruction can occur as quickly as possible.
All recent inquiries and all of the events that I just spoke about, one consistent theme through all of those inquiries was that there were major shortcomings in communications for a whole range of reasons, and not necessarily individuals' faults, but there were a range of shortcomings. And that is consistent in every review of those major events.
But we've learned a great many things from the last year, that we have good plans for the immediate aftermath, and they work really well. That a return to normal takes a considerable time, more time than any of us were prepared for, and much, much longer than the rest of the country expects. That strong unions that have the resources to support workers both in the immediate aftermath and through the extended recovery period are essential, as is investment in good public services, because public services are what's actually getting us through this and what are going to be critical in the rebuild of our city. Because we will have a new city, and we all hope and expect that it will be a better city.
But I think there is an opportunity for a group like this to lobby the Telecommunications Union, the International Telecommunications, the ITU, and the Asia Pacific Telecommunity to set aside a section of broadband for public safety broadband communications, so there is harmonisation of public safety agencies' communication across the Asia Pacific region. Because quite often Australian rescue workers find themselves working in Asia, quite often Asian rescue workers working in Australia and New Zealand, and likewise. It would be wonderful if in the future we had consistency across our communication systems throughout this whole region.
It is a sad reflection of the long road ahead of us that much of your conference has discussed abuses of worker rights within our own region.
With the military government now running our country, we have also had the incidents of relatives of military, or even the military coming in uniform and demanding that their relatives be served first because he is linked. We've tried to tell the nurse, you stand your ground, and you tell them that I will serve you when I'm ready to serve you. I am here to serve all the people coming through the door.
The biggest corruption ever was prevalent in this country than now. The corruptions are in corridors of power. The regime has promised time and again that the elections will be held in 2014, but there is I very much doubt anyone you can speak to in Fiji. They're not sure whether the elections will happen in 2014. If it's going to happen, it's not going to be free and fair election. So the situation is really bad. We do not know.
As you all know, in PSI we have been expressing this deep concern about the effect that the military regime has had, and the way that the military regime in Fiji has issued a raft of anti-union decrees, the net result of which will be to virtually abolish independent democratic unions in Fiji.
We'll also be writing to the Australian government. The $37.5 million of aid to Fiji in 2000 to 2012. Not a single cent of taxpayer money, our money, should be spent on organisations, goods or services where human rights have been denied.
I stand here today and tell you that all Australian unions support the resolution on Fiji you are proposing at this conference and join our colleagues from around the Asia-Pacific region in unreservedly condemning the ongoing harassment and persecution of workers and their union representatives in Fiji.